chair. No, John is the alternate. John's the alternate.
I think it's 4.
Yep, 4. Turn here.
What about this one? No, that's it. Okay. Call to order, please. Roll call.
Member Berg,
Here.
Member Fig, Member Nast,
Here.
Alternate Member Sharkey,
Present.
Ex Officio Member Nordahl, Vice Chair Schnapp,
Here.
Chair Spiegel.
Here. Okay, now the agenda. Yes. Move to approve the agenda.
Move to approve the
Second.
agenda.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent items, approve of minutes.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the consent calendar and with the notation that I will be abstaining on the minutes.
I'll
Yes.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Cash disbursements ratification.
So we did all of this. It covers A, B, and C.
And C, okay, including this?
Here, yeah. So
We're on business. Business items, the Brackish Water Reclamation Demonstration Facility Operation Report.
Yes, good afternoon, Board. This is the report, monthly report from July 1st through August 31st for our treatment plant. During that period, July and August, we used 3.6 million gallons per day, and that's the same amount as the previous period. The facility was operated in membrane mode for the majority of that time, with the United Water Conservation District supplying 76.2% on Cayugas, Municipal Water District 23.8%. PHWA continues to meet all the state and federal regulation standards. The silt density index is sampled twice a day, and it averaged 2.18 for the 2 months, is an indication of the iron and manganese entering the plant. United's well water quality exceeded the threshold limit of 3 SDI, causing the plant to be shut down July 20th until July 23rd. And then again, the plant was offline from July 31st to August 20th. We went back on and is currently in operation. The water supply allocation update, we're still under the emergency ordinance E. That has not changed. With respect to a shortage alert, we do not anticipate any shortage of water for PHWA in the near future. Again, however, the groundwater sustainability plan is still in flux, so that will eventually have an impact on us. PHWA has historically been maximizing United allocation in order to preserve the right to groundwater because of its lower cost compared to the state water. So we continue to take as much United water as possible. So that, and currently there is no additional fiscal impact from these, from this report. Are there any questions?
No, there don't seem to be any. Thanks a lot, Don.
Move to receive and file.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Contract. B, the contract amendment for groundwater consulting services.
Thank you, Chair Spiegel. I'll be handling this item. The board may recall that PHWA approved an agreement with Hopkins Groundwater Consultants last April in 2017. Curtis Hopkins is the principal consultant for this company. He's been the primary hydrogeologist that has been hired on behalf of all the municipal and industrial users. He's paid by 5 different parties. That includes us, the City of Camarillo, City of Ventura, City of Oxnard, Camarosa Water District, as well as City of Moore Park. For all things related to the OPV plane, it includes all those parties, minus Moore Park, of course. Because of the elongated process that we've gone with developing the GSP, we've exhausted our $20,000 initial allocation that we had for Mr. Hopkins. I would like to tell you that we are close to seeing the end, but that would not be totally truthful. Where we're at right now, we hope that when I come back in maybe a year's time and deliver a similar message that we will be close, but we are at least a year away from any sort of adoption with the GSP. And that being said, we do require Mr. Hopkins' continued help with the GSP development. So before you is an amendment to that original agreement for a time extension that goes till June 30th, 2019. I'm sorry, December 31st, 2019, and an additional $20,000 appropriation from PHWA. If there's any questions, staff can take them now.
So moved to approve the contract.
I just had one question. Are all these activities equally funding 20,000?
That's a great question. So we're all pitching in equal amounts, but by different methods. And let me explain that. Every other agency not named PHWA has an existing on-call service agreement with Mr. Hopkins. So that on-call service agreement is for hydrogeology services in general, maybe not necessarily related specifically to the GSP. And so, just like us, every single public agency that is paying consultant must have an existing agreement. They're using an on-call services agreement. We're just using a more specific agreement for this particular task. Does that help answer your question?
Yes.
Maybe more.
On-call meaning being able to cover meetings for the GMA?
Right. So an on-call, maybe that's the source of confusion. An on-call agreement means that you don't necessarily specify a specific meeting or task when you enter an agreement with a particular service professional. It's just a blanket agreement that over the course of the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, however long the agreement may be, you retain the option to call them for anything that they are an expert in. And so for the City of Oxnard, as an example, they've hired Mr. Hopkins on a 5-year agreement. And anything related to hydrogeology where they need an expert and may not be related to the GSP, they'll call Mr. Hopkins and they have an existing agreement for that.
Thank you.
Mr.
Move
Sharp,
to approve the recommended action.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The groundwater sustainability plan development.
I'll keep this one rather brief as well. There's not been a whole lot of movement on the groundwater sustainability plan, mainly because we're allowing the ag community to come to terms with each other on a couple of sticking points. As a testament to how kind of in a waiting game that the M&I group is on, for the first time in a year, the M&I meeting has been canceled tomorrow, our smaller OPV group, mainly because, like I said, we're just kind of waiting on the ag community to figure out a couple of loose ends. Whether they come to an agreement on those things is yet to be decided, but we're hopeful that when next month rolls around, we'll have some clarity on these issues. So for right now, not a whole lot to report, but when we speak next month, I hope to report some good news.
Action. So move.
Madam Chair? Yeah, for those of us who have, are stepping in and out and pinch hitting and all that. So exactly where are we now? What are the sticking points that AG's having, and what's it looking like for M&I allocations?
Yeah. So the short story is.
Yeah, the short story.
The short story is there's kind of been 2 camps that have been developed recently. Historically, it used to be ag versus M&I, but we kind of got past that. We came to the agreement that there's going to be a 60-40 split when it came to the basin, 60 going to ag, 40 going to M&I. Now that we're getting down to the finer details, ag is having a discussion about, well, among their own pool, what time period should be used to carve up their 60% of the pie. The M&I users have already done that. We're going to use the T period, 2003 to 2012. We've all agreed to that loosely, nothing legally binding yet, but we've all agreed in concept that that's the period we're going to use to carve up our 40%. Ag is trying to figure out what basis they're going to use to carve up their 60%. And there's just been a lot of push and pull as to which years and what year range and how long that range is going to be to allocate their 60%. So the two new parties that have kind of emerged are all of M&I plus most of ag versus a contingent of ag. And that contingent of ag has some legitimate arguments, and I'm hoping that there can be enough of a bend amongst the parties to arrive at some agreement without any sort of long and painful legal proceeding.
So who's in the camps? How is that breaking down on the ag side? Is it big operators, little operators, or is it just sort of random?
These are all obviously farmers of some nature. Rather than name names in a public setting, I'd prefer to just leave it at there's one very large grower who feels very differently from the rest of the group on how that allocation should be, what methodology should be used.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and in terms of the SGMA process and GMA, what do we know? Is this part of the part of moving us forward and getting us in position for that?
Yeah, so we're still on target to meet the deadline. That's the good news. Oxnard Plain has been pegged as a critically overdrafted basin, meaning we have to have an adopted GSP by 2020. The original goal when the GMA set out for this was, I believe, October of this year, as in next month. That's clearly not going to happen. I think if we can get to something to be adopted by October of next year, we'd be doing pretty good. So maybe that was the goal all along, where we shoot for a really early date, knowing that it's going to take longer, and then we end up being ahead of schedule. So. Yeah,
and do you have any idea where we fit in around the state? I mean, I imagine everybody's having problems.
I would assume so, and I like to think that we got started earlier than others. We're one of the few critically overdrafted basins in Southern California, and so you can't really look kind of north and south to other basins around here to see who else is on schedule, because no one is in the same position that Oxnard Plain is in. You have to go to the San Joaquin Valley to find others that are also in the critically overdrafted status. But I imagine, I would hope, I have not checked in, that they are following a similar timeline.
Okay, great, thanks.
I had moved for C to be.
That was it.
That was
It's
it?
just to
Yeah.
receive
Oh,
verbal
well, I thought you put, because it said action. Okay.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's okay. D, strategic planning results presentation.
Yeah, let me just take a brief couple seconds to introduce Ryan Gallagher. For those of you that have not met him yet or need a refresher, Ryan Gallagher performed the strategic planning exercise on behalf of both the district and also the city of Port Hueneme. The presentation today is more of an overview of what's to come next. He'll go over briefly what he took away from the two strategic planning exercises, but the focus of this presentation is more about what's going to happen over the next year and 2 years. So with that, Ryan Gallagher.
Am I going to be able to see the PowerPoint? I've got a good memory, but I don't know if it's all right, let's see if this works. Oh, look at that. Okay, great. All right, as Akbar mentioned, this is a pretty high-level overview. It's mostly focused on what's coming next, although I did include some of the results. You guys probably remember we did go through detailed results for each of the findings, and those are available. I can send those out after if people want to see that in detail and spend some time with it. So I'll go through introduction, the overview of what we had done previously and what's coming next. And we'll have some detailed points there. I did want to point out, if anyone noticed, I used to be with KEH and Associates, and now I'm with Gannett Fleming. KEH was acquired last month, and so Gannett Fleming is a larger company. I just wanted to give this quick, this is not a sales pitch, just so you guys are aware of what's going on here. Gannett Fleming, 2,300 people. The name probably doesn't sound familiar. They're mostly on the East Coast. They've been around for over 100 years doing water, so lots of expertise. And then on the left, I just pointed out, what's really important is not necessarily the firm that I'm coming from. It's really my experience. It's the role I'm having in all this is pretty critical, and you can see there I've done a lot of work with not only both these agencies, but a lot of stakeholders we'll be working with going forward. All right, won't spend any more time on that. So why are we doing this? We talked about this over a year ago when we first started down this path. Some of the key drivers are really the groundwater supply reductions. We talked about the GSP already and that process. You can see on the right are two graphics. The top is from the City of Port Hueneme presentation that we did, and the bottom is from the district, Channel Islands Beach Community Services District. And what you can see there is although demands have dropped off for both agencies and we have adequate supply, the future is really unknown, and we're coming pretty close. And so if we have a slight uptick in demand and through the GSP our supplies are further reduced, we can see that we're going to have some potential shortfalls. The other driver of this is the cost of imported water. You guys are probably well aware of the California Water Fix. That's a $17 billion program. And so the cost of imported water, which as we heard earlier is about 28% of your water supply, is going to continue to rise, and that's going to impact your total cost of water. The other is need for asset planning. You've got facilities that are now over 20 years old, and the time to repair and rehab those is starting to come up. You've already done some of it. Your tank conditioning is a good example. And it's good to plan ahead because we don't want to repair something we plan to tear out in a year. So that's the other driver. Regional opportunities, there's been a lot of turnover, as you guys are probably well aware of, at all agencies, including your own. And so this creates new opportunities. Not only are those people open to new projects, but they are working on new projects. I'll mention a few of those later. And then the last is being proactive. We see this coming, and we want to be ahead of it. And that's another driver for this process. Okay, so what have we done to date? Obviously, we knew this was important. That's why we started on it. As Akbar mentioned, we did go through the phase one. We saw this as a multi-phase approach. So phase one was really trying to understand what the respective board and council felt was of value and which projects we wanted to focus on. And so that process, there were two distinct processes, and they included basically the same thing. It was the engagement using a survey process and a couple of workshops. We had over 50 questions for each group. And through that, we were able to discern where the values were and then use that to then apply to over 25 different project concepts. And through that came up with shortlists. And so the district completed their process in May 2017. You can see there, those are the 4 top projects. DPR was there. Recharge at Spreading Grounds via Ventura, that was using imported water and taking advantage of at the time, they had been in the early stages of planning their state water connection. And so the idea was to basically do what United is planning to do, and that is pull some water off and use that to recharge the Spreading Grounds. The next was optimization at the City of Oxnard brackish water facility. And then the last item was doing some brackish desalination at the district facility. So those were the top projects that came out of that process. City of Port Hueneme had some similar projects, and I tried to highlight that by making the similar colors. So you can see number 1 was DPR, and that matches up well with what the district, one of the district's projects, also DPR. Indirect potable reuse, although the naming or the way it's described isn't exactly the same as the district project, but it's the same concept. It's using a new water supply to add that to the Spreading Grounds and being able to access that water via your existing OH connection. The third one was PHWA optimization. That was at your brackish water facility. And if you remember, about a year ago, a study was completed looking at that exact process. So again, very similar to what the district had come up with, just kind of a different way of approaching it. And the final 2 were seawater desal and recycled water for irrigation. So although some were similar, some were not similar, but this was pretty good considering we started with 25 to have this much overlap. And we have a number of detailed results that came out of that. There was quite a bit of similarity between the two. So all those projects will now feed into the next phase, phase 2. This was the contract that was approved, I think, a couple of months ago. And so here's what this process will look like. That contract, as we just mentioned, was approved, and we submitted the data request in August. So the district and City of Port Hueneme and Navy Base are working on those results, or that data response now. We expect to get that in mid-October. And from that, we'll move to part 1 of a 2-part focus for this next phase, and that is this model development. And really the main point of this is we want to evaluate what the impact of all these changing costs over time, what the reduction of water supply, and we're going to look at different scenarios, and we're going to come out of this understanding more clearly what is the range of water that we need. Is it 100 acre-feet or is it 1,000? And this will be really helpful once we get the data to go through and understand that better. And then the next important item that comes out of that is what's an acceptable cost of this new water supply? And that's important because as we talk to stakeholders about potential regional projects or how we might get involved, we want to know what we can afford that actually lowers our cost of water. And we would come back in January to do a board presentation, and then the next step would be outreach. So now that we understand how much water we need to satisfy our demands in the future, we can start bringing those up in conversations with some stakeholders. Now these are just placeholders. Those will be kind of, those are fluid. How many meetings those are, it's just a general starting point. The reason that this whole process is important now is that there's a lot of other activities that are happening in the county. We heard about the GSP in particular. There's also the City of Oxnard. City of Oxnard has an RFP out right now. The proposals are due tomorrow for a business plan. There's been a lot of talk about this over the last year. It's now starting to happen. And this is going to help drive what they're going to do with their recycled water system. And there's been a lot of different alternatives being thrown around. The idea is that this plan will cement that. And so you can see where that lines up. Their process starts in January, right when we have more clear data as to how much water we need and what we can pay for it to make it make economic sense for us. So the timing of this is really good. And then there's a number of other things that are happening right now that make the timing of this overall process helpful. We talked about the United, the iron and manganese treatment. That's really important to us if we want to optimize the brackish water facility. We really need that incoming water to be of high quality. So how that's being phased is important. The GSP, of course. United and Cayugas both have various regional projects that they are looking at, and so we want to have conversations with them to understand those timelines better. And then the Ventura United State Water Interconnect is also a project that's in the planning stages now.
Is it okay to ask questions as we go through?
I've talked kind of fast, so it's hard to jump in.
That's okay. So the question I have is, would it be advisable for both the CIBSD and this board to meet together as we move forward, or are we still going to be working in silos but on these different elements?
Yeah, I think the process that we laid out some time ago was that the way that the other board members of our respective agencies will have participated would have been at our individual agency level. So I don't want to make it seem like they have no input when it comes to what's going to happen next. They clearly were part of those initial studies that Ryan conducted. Notwithstanding that, I would expect that the members on the PHWA board would go back to their respective council and board to report back on, hey, here's what's developing at PHWA. Is there preference or will of this board or council to then direct PHWA to some new input? Maybe a joint meeting sometime down the road isn't out of the question. I think when we get down to a very pivotal point in this process, which as Ryan's going to describe in a little while, we still got some ways to go. When we get to that point, I think a joint meeting maybe would be warranted.
Okay, all right, very good.
Okay. So
I just had a question. For those of us that weren't here for the decision-making process and going through answering the 50 questions, there's a few things that come to mind. Number one is, has any technology leap overtaken events, for what original decisions? Is there anything new out there that wasn't being proposed before that should be looked at?
we were pretty forward-thinking when we went through the questions and talked through that. The DPR is the next step in the forward-thinking. That's us considering the innovations that are going to be occurring. DPR is not currently permitted, but we understand, based on the state's timeline, that by 2023, there'll be permitting guidelines in place to be able to do it. So outside of, kind of forward thinking and looking at that, there aren't any new technologies. There's been some advances in DPR with regards to people actually pursuing it further and some more pilot testing. But as far as outside, technologies like membrane technologies, there haven't been some advances in the last year since we undertook this study that would change our course.
Right, I think there's an AWOP presentation being made this month about some things that are on the table. I guess the other question is, did you also fold in the economy to scale with Weneme and Channel Islands going together on a project?
Well, everything going, in this evaluation, everything going forward is looking at PHWA as a whole. So there isn't any, I'm not sure if I understand the question right.
Well, if we were to help develop and help fund one system as a group together, we would enjoy some economy to scale, I would hope.
Right.
I can help tackle this one, Ryan. The model that Ryan's going to be developing, and that's it's listed up on the slide right now in the November-December timeframe, the 4 scenarios. When we deliver our data response to Ryan, he's going to be developing that model based on our aggregate consumption and our aggregate demand. And so when it comes to costs and how much, whether it be chemicals or buying water from this source or that source, he's going to be considering it at a PHWA level. And that's where we are in this process. We talked about how he did the analysis for each individual agency. Now we're at the PHWA level, where his entire mindset is going to be, how much does this cost for PHWA as a whole, without really giving a whole lot of consideration to the 3 parties underneath it. Does that make sense?
I think so.
I guess these categories, I can see now what you're asking. Economy of scale is really what we're focusing on these regional pictures. When we talk about DPR and IPR, this isn't a PHWA only. This would be in conjunction with the City of Oxnard or conjunction with United. We are looking at regional projects and understanding that there is the economy of scale. Because these projects, DPR wouldn't really make sense on your own. Okay, all right, okay. Sorry, these are pretty high-level slides, so that detail is not really in there. But when I mentioned that we looked at 25 different concepts, IPR was multiple of concepts. It's just they all fall under the umbrella of IPR. But the ones that are kind of rising to the top are the ones where we're working in conjunction with Oxnard or others. Okay, so here's the last slide. This is kind of looking forward then. We just talked through phase 2, and if you remember, that schedule showed us getting done in April of 2019. And at that point, we will have reached out, we'll understand how much water we need, what we're willing to pay, and we should start to see some projects dropping out of that. And at which point we can go into phase 3, which kind of has 3 main components. We now want to take these focus projects and define them further, understand, we'll actually start establishing what the cost to do the project is, defining the scope so that we would be in a position to implement. Simultaneously developing a working group, assuming that the projects would have a partner, as we just talked about, especially the regional projects. We'd want to put in place or build off existing working groups, say the OH group, depending on who the stakeholders are. But establish those working groups to start moving the project forward, and then establish a program schedule. And this would lay out what the implementation would look like. And the reason I say that is what's going to come out of this is unlikely to be a single project. We're not going to say this is the project that fixes everything. Because we want to be cost conscious and because not everything is known today, what will likely happen is we'll see a short-term project and a long-term project. And the short-term project would get us to the delta that we know we need to fill. And what we do is we'd keep our pulse on the longer term and continue to develop those. So something like a DPR might be a long-term solution, but because we're not there today, we're not going to move on that. We're going to move on the short term and kind of continue with the working group on the long term. And so finally, this ends with implementation, with the end coming down into 2020 or 2022. And I point that out because when we started this process, we asked the board and council respectively, how long do you think this process should take, or how long do you want it to take? And 5 years was what both sides agreed to. And so we are, you know, we're nearing the completion, or we'll be close to completing the second phase, with the ultimate completion being 5 years from the start of that. So that's pretty good that we're sticking to what the board and council had originally laid out. That's it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very good. Over the course of the last several months, Oxnard's had, of course, court decisions on their rates. They also had a state grant to repair their wastewater plant. And earlier in the year, I was talking with Mayor Flynn about having a joint meeting. We're talking about doing that in July, but somehow with the events that have occurred, some of the enthusiasm seems to have worn off a bit, and now we're, you know, I figured the timeline was going to slip anyway. So they're starting their business plan in January. Now, I still think that you know, the future is reclamation. I still think that plant, no matter how much you fix it, has no future. So whoever is sitting in this chair in January, won't be me, I hope we'll push on with that. And with that comment, just ask you, have you been in touch with the folks in Oxnard? Do you have any sensibility about what they're thinking about? Are they just waiting to start the business plan, or is there impetus to actually move towards some kind of a joint project that would involve the members of this agency and the city of Oxnard, and perhaps the county as well?
Oh gosh. If I could crystal ball what the city of Oxnard was planning.
Yeah, you would do so well if you could do that.
That's a tough one.
It'd be worth your weight in gold.
It's a changing landscape for sure. They're definitely committed to recycled water. There's no doubt about that. And the business plan is really meant to provide the justification. They have everyone knocking on their door because they have this asset and everyone wants to be part of it and take advantage of it. So it's difficult to say which way it's going to go. I think they're, you know, moving quickly on the business plan is going to be a challenge, but I would guess you could do it in 4 to 6 months. So that might be the earliest that we have some idea of where they're heading. So that puts us in mid-2019. I would say though that I expect, and we'll know more when the model is complete, your demands of what your shortfall is going to be are likely fairly small. So no matter what direction they go in, given your proximity to the AWPF and the amount of water that you need and compared to how much water they have available, I think there's a good chance we're going to be able to find a way to work together with them. So I think it's positive, but I would say it's difficult to project.
Yeah, well, that's understood, but I think it's in the interests of, you know, 250,000 people that we all be a part of this process. You know, our respective agencies here, the Phwa as a group, and you know, I really think the county needs to be in on this too, just for political weight. You know, what I'm doing is encouraging those who will be my successors to be completely and thoroughly engaged with Oxnard, as strange and difficult as that can be at times.
Director Sharkey, and to Oxnard's credit, when they published this RFP, which is available online to anyone, there's only 4 scope items. And one of those 4 scope items is dedicated solely to outreach to other local agencies. So I have to commend them for adding that and really making it a big part of their overall project. And whoever ends up being the consultant for that project, I hope that they follow through on that scope item, really make it a robust outreach, a true outreach that this agency becomes a part of.
Yeah, I've plowed that field over there, and I just hope that we don't lose sight of that, and we stay involved.
All right.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Nada. Okay. Board member reports and comments, starting with you, Mr. Sharkey. Nothing. Bob? Bob always says something.
I wanted to ask Akbar if it's okay if we let the folks from Port Hueneme in on just what's going on with the Channel Islands water quality problem, or, I don't know how that works with getting it agendized, or whether they even have a dog in the fight, or whether they'd be interested.
Well, I think at this point you perhaps know more than I do on that item, but as far as whether it's in the scope of services for this agency, it's hard to tell. Without Mr. Green here, I really don't know. But I think at the very least your colleague might be interested to know what the story is there.
At that point, to agendize it for next month?
Well, Madam Chair, if it's just an information item, then it would fit under the board member comments.
That was my
As
intention.
long as
I think
there's no action unless there's confidential information.
Yeah,
involved.
no, there's no confidential,
ahead.
and I think your exposure or liabilities or interest would be limited depending upon whether you own a house over by the harbor or not. But you are curious, yeah. So if you want to know all the details, I'd be happy to send an email that I just sent out. If you just give me your email addresses, it gives the background, the proposed fix, what's been happening, how much we've been supported by the LA Regional Water Quality Control Board, that essentially says they can't handle any problems due to circulation. It's not in their regulatory toolbox. They would, however, be glad to help us with any sort of point sources of contamination coming from agricultural runoff, which we could probably expect to see now that NRG has already stopped their actual pumping. So we're not getting water pumped through the harbor the way we did. We have dirty, murky water with a low degree of dissolved oxygen, which is going to present problems with algae blooms depending upon how the water temperature spikes in the future. And depending upon how much, if we have even a small rainfall event, we're going to see a lot more agricultural runoff in the harbor. So all in all, it's not a rosy picture. So if anybody's interested, I'd be more than happy to forward them.
Well, Madam Chair, has the county posted any of that information on their website or anything?
The board has. I don't believe, well.
The LA board?
Yeah, the LA board. One of our recommendations is that the county get more engaged, and we say that respectfully, but right now Oxnard spent over $200,000 for testing and also procurement of like 7 aerators, which 6 aerators that have been merely a bandage. So.
Bob, were you going to send out the emails people were?
If they're interested, I didn't.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Nothing? Nothing?
No comments.
No comment? No comment?
If you're ready to move down to Executive Director and Assistant Director,
Yes.
I have just one item. So I've been trying to keep the board apprised in terms of the replacement of Steve Hickox. You'll recall that Steve rode off into the sunset of retirement back on April 30th, so we're now almost 5 months without a permanent occupant in that position. A little bit of news to report. A week from this Thursday, so not Thursday the 20th, but Thursday, September 27th, we'll be interviewing 5 finalists for that permanent appointment. Bill Avery from Avery & Associates, executive recruitment firm, has done a lot of work for the city over the last 5 years, has identified, it was a small pool of applicants, but within that small pool, there were 5 what appear to be pretty well qualified, certificated, experienced people, including I think at least 3 that have Ventura County experience. So we'll be interviewing them on the 27th, and we'll keep the board posted after that. The goal is still to have someone on board no later than late October, early November.
Very good. Yes.
No comments from me.
No comments? Okay, and
I just had one comment.
it's okay.
Who will be the subject matter experts? I will be sitting on the board. If I would recommend Mr. Alican.
it just dawned on me sitting here this afternoon that we should find a way to include Akbar somehow in the process. We're looking at doing 2 panels that day, so there should be room to allow him to participate and give his feedback, both from his current role and his previous life as a consultant. So that's a good idea.
Okay, any new business to be agendized then at this point? None? And an open forum, anyone who would wish to speak to the board and that has nothing to do with the agenda but beyond the agenda, would you please approach the podium? Nada. Okay, and with that I say, have a nice evening.